I have struggled with this topic. I don't actually remember preaching on this particular topic specifically before. And that will be a long number of years. I remember when I was undertaking some theological training many, many years ago, and the college principal had been newly appointed at the start of my second year. And he was responsible for the mission class, or missiology, it was rather fancifully titled. And he explained the first week when he came in, he says, we have two periods of time together, which would be about an hour and a half. He says, it is highly unlikely in year one that these lessons will last beyond an hour. And he said, the reason was, I'm doing this for the first time. And he says, as well as that, I've got a college to run and a family to bring up. And it was fascinating because he was honest, and he basically said, week to week, let's just take it as it comes. It was refreshing, and he was the best lecturer I ever had. Coming in the car, I had that same sense. I would love to explore and expand where we are going to touch this morning, but I've just got this time now. But I'll take that away for me, and you can do with that whatever you want to do. As Easter approaches, you are going to share a journey. That journey will not be straightforward, because you will encounter events and the emotions that go with them that will take you to places of questioning and vulnerability, or at least they should. As you listen and reflect, you will be challenged to engage with who you are and with where you are at on your faith journey. It's a journey that demands much of us until we get to that glorious moment in what was my father's favourite passage of Scripture, and which I have inherited, in Luke's Gospel, when the resurrected Jesus, and I quote, draws near and walks with them. You have a fair bit of walking to do before you get to that point. And we begin with one of the most perplexing incidents in the lead-up to the arrest and trial of Jesus, because we're introduced by the Gospel writers to Judas Iscariot. From what we know of the disciples that follow Jesus, he is not one of the high flyers. That doesn't appear to be one of his aspirations. When they're having heated discussions and debates, and they did, about which of them was better than the other, or which of the one would Jesus regard as greatest, there is no record of Judas being involved in those discussions. He's always in the background. But as the journey of the disciples of Jesus comes to an end, he is about to play a role of profound significance. This is where we're headed, as you can see. I was rather naughty a couple of weeks ago in my own congregation when I said there were 3 points and they relaxed. What I didn't tell them until the third point was that the third point had 3 sub-points. You're okay. We need to complete the story. Matthew 27 and verses 3 and 4. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests. I have sinned, he said. Here are the takeaways from my perspective from this extraordinary incident and its consequences. Jesus, at the beginning of our reading this morning, is again preparing his disciples for what lies ahead. They have much to reflect and consider, especially Judas. Now, as we said, he was not one of the high-profile disciples. His focus, it seems, was on administration. He was the treasurer of the little Jesus community. However, if you go to John chapter 12 and verses 4 to 6, you will discover that he was a treasurer who somewhat lacked in integrity, because much of the funds went into his own pocket. And at a moment, as described for us in Matthew, but also in the other gospel writers, at a moment described by one writer as an act of unlimited devotion to Jesus, when a woman takes a jar of expensive ointment and takes it to Jesus and anoints him, Judas is rebuked along with his fellow disciples because he does not understand the events that are unfolding before him. The setting then moves to meeting with the chief priests, who are desperate to find a way to remove Jesus from the scene without causing, as it says, a riot among the people. Only way to do that was to find a moment of quiet and of peace when no one was there. And Judas presents them with a perfect opportunity. If Jesus has been symbolically anointed by a woman with the jar in preparation for his burial, this moment with the chief priests and Judas means that the story moves to the next stage. There is a momentum that will find itself at the crucifixion. Money changes hands. Now, whether or not that was Judas's motivation is not easy to discern. The experts tell us that 30 pieces of silver at that point in time was not a lot of money. Many commentators suggest that the underlying frustration of Judas that Jesus was not turning out to be the kind of Messiah that he wanted, that he anticipated, was perhaps behind his actions, and perhaps he could bring about something that would change events to be more like what he thought the Messiah should be like. An end to Roman occupation, leading a popular uprising, but Jesus was not the person who was going to do that. For whatever reason, an agreement was made. There then follows an extraordinary exchange of words in the upper room between Judas and Jesus, where Judas is left again in no doubt that Jesus is fully aware of what is going on. And yet Jesus breaks bread with Judas. The scene changes. The agreement to betray soon leads to a physical act of betrayal. Judas kisses Jesus, indicating to the authorities who it is in the darkness they should head for and arrest. And the deed was done. Paul, writing later and reflecting on these events, says this was the night in which he was betrayed. Now you'll continue that journey over the coming weeks. Just to add at this point that Judas would go on, if you go back to Matthew 27, go beyond verses 5, in the next few verses, Judas suffered a violent death. What I'd like us to note here is the major, I guess, theological takeaway from this story. At no time is there any sense of events in Jesus' mind getting out of control. This is not a journey that's taking off in a direction that Jesus is surprised by. The end, humanly speaking, when it comes, is in no way going to be seen as a failure. The mission has not been derailed by the actions of the people closest to him. There is no surprise here. Indeed, at this key moment of one man's betrayal, there is in fact a profound irony. Sinful men do their best to thwart the will of God, but in doing so, they actually help to bring about the will of God. There is, at least to me, a real sense of mystery amidst the certainty. And some of my questions that I still have to get answers to are here. And just a few hours later, the disciples who had vociferously proclaimed their loyalty had disappeared, and Jesus was left alone. Jesus himself comments on what is happening to him and around him. Chapter 26, verse 54 and onwards. But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? It must happen in this way. At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me?" Of course he wasn't. Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place, that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. This is the will of God. This is the choice of Jesus. I want to say something about Judas and me. What can I take away on a personal level from these events? What application pastorally can there be? How am I impacted? In a general sense, we're being introduced to the foundations of the gospel here. And although the very specific act of betrayal may not seem like that connects with me, there is stuff. There is stuff. There are plenty of opportunities in the relationships we are part of where we can experience the depths of pain, disappointment that betrayal in other senses can bring. Relationships with the people around us, or indeed as we understand our faith relationship and journey with Jesus. The impact of such a moment can be deep and it can be long-lasting. The Old Testament is full of examples where family and faith find themselves in deep trouble. Psalm 41, verse 9, in an astonishingly clear foreshadowing of the Judas story, David says in Psalm 41, "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me." David is speaking of a very human relationship. He goes on, Psalm 55, he says, "But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship," and so on and so on. David also knew what it was to have his own son turn against him. David also knew what it was to be the betrayer. Have a look at Psalm 51, the psalm of utter devastation and ultimate repentance when he realizes that his life story is not quite what it should have been. There are deep emotional struggles relating to a marriage relationship if you head over to the book of Hosea and dig into that story. Come into the New Testament, Paul has to live with the knowledge of his passion to destroy the first Christians. He was implicated, as you know, in the stoning of Stephen. And these are not easy to engage with because often they are just too close to reality. And how often do we hear the heart of God, especially in the Old Testament, as he reflects on how people who he has treasured walk away from him. And that whole story provides the foundation for the gospel story. The act of rebellion, of walking away, in whatever form it may take, is not unknown to us. Judas doesn't have long to live with the regret and the practical ramifications of his actions. Often we do, and sometimes it can take a lifetime. Last thought. Life in all its fullness is certainly not without suffering, pain, or disappointment. Now, that much is clear as we reflect on Jesus' life. And if you're honest this morning, that much is also clear as you reflect on your own life. And a church community should allow us to express safely that sense of suffering, of pain, and disappointment. Worship that has no place for the level of vulnerability seen in our thoughts this morning is not true worship. We need to find here a place where the most powerful and disturbing storms are not ignored, where broken people meet other broken people, where we will encounter friends, guides, supporters, and where ultimately we will encounter Jesus himself. The Jesus who invites us to negotiate the traumas of life through the bringing of forgiveness into our lives, through understanding our own rebelliousness and sinfulness, through exploring newness of life with him. And your journey over the next few weeks will bring all of these things into sharp focus. One of the hats that I wear, and actually it's where a lot of my spare time ends up, is I'm trustee, and have been for 12 years, of a West Lothian charity which seeks to help with people's financial and emotional well-being. I bumped into one of our counsellors this week, and I said, can you, do you have a sense of what I mean by the word betrayal? He says, Ken, I'm a couples counsellor in the main. Yes, I get what a sense of betrayal is. I says, is there a direct me somewhere, practically, professionally, that has a pastoral edge? And he did. and I've not really had time to explore, but I will. He referred me to Professor John Gottman and 3 ingredients for healing from betrayal. You have it at no cost. And his 3 headings, intriguingly, have a religious language context. His 3 headings are attone, attune, and attach. Now, I'm not going to develop that this morning. There's no time to do that, and it's not the place. But I just want to say, do you know what? Sometimes we might not get the help and support we need on a Sunday morning. Sometimes we need to find professional help and support if the pain is deep. That, folks, is not weakness. That is not betraying your faith. It might save your sanity at the end of the day. John Swinton is a professor of practical theology at Aberdeen University and pastoral care. I met him on a couple of occasions. He's a Church of Scotland elder. He has a nursing background and he has lots of books. Last year, I picked up Finding Jesus in the Storm. It's essentially about his specialisation, which is mental health and well-being. But I want to just read one little passage to bring this together. Life in all its fullness is life with God, a God who accompanies us on a complex journey within which we live in the startling light of the resurrection, but remain intensely aware that Jesus' cry from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" still resonates throughout creation. Life in all its fullness is not life without tears, but life with the one who dries our tears and moves us onward to fresh pastures.